Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Exploring Cinema. I'm Nate.
And I'm Dylan.
And I'm Adam.
Today, we are talking about Wong Kar-wai's 2000 masterpiece, In the Mood for Love, to kick off the month of February. We are leaning right into the month of romance here and Valentine's Day and all that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
So, Adam, what is In the Mood for Love about?
Yes, In the Mood for Love from 2000. Two neighbors form a strong bond after both suspect extramarital activities of their spouses. However, they agree to keep their bond platonic so as to not commit similar wrongs.
Yeah, so a very interesting premise. I think this is one of those movies that kind of goes slightly in a direction you don't really expect, particularly with the way that it plays out. And really quickly, I had seen this before. I watched this last year at some point. I can't remember exactly when, and neither of you had seen this. Is that correct?
No, yeah, but me and to see it for a long time.
Okay, yeah, this is one that had been on the list for a long time, and we'll get into why right now with At a Glance. As I said, directed by Wong Kar-wai, one of the most celebrated directors of the last 50 years. I couldn't find anything for a budget on this movie, but it made anywhere between like $12 and $15 million from what I've been able to see. So it didn't make a ton. But the accolades, this is a movie that critics absolutely love and just continues to show up on more and more best of all times lists. 92% on Rotten Tomatoes and 8.1 on IMDb, 4.4 on Letterboxd. That's the highest if you kind of compare to how the scores go of those three sites. That puts it at the number 48 movie of all time on the Letterboxd Top 250, right between Bong Joon-ho's Memories of Murder and The Empire Strikes Back.
Nice. Nice.
And then just more love for In the Mood for Love here. The number 2 movie of the 21st century on the BBC list in 2016, one spot behind Mulholland Drive, which was at number 1, which we also did an episode on. That was the very first episode of Exploring Cinema. The number 5 movie of all time in the most recent Sight and Sound Critics poll, which came out in 2022, and it was number 9 on the directors list for that year. So both directors and critics had it in the top 10. In 2023, Time Out made a list of the top 100 movies of all time, and it came in at number 9 between Seven Samurai and There Will Be Blood. 2001: A Space Odyssey was number 1 on that list. And in 2015, the Busan International Film Festival ranked it as the number 3 Asian movie of all time behind Ozu's Tokyo Story and Kurosawa's Rashomon.
All right.
Oh, In the Mood for Love. Have you heard of it? Very, very celebrated movie. I was lucky enough to watch this with Adam, which was really fun. Dylan had a scheduling conflict and couldn't join us, but you were able to get to it in the last couple of days. Before we dive into our opening statements, though, want to remind everybody to like and subscribe to help the channel grow and make sure you get updates on whenever we do one of these deep dives. We do about one of them a week, and we've started to kind of theme out our months. We just released our preview for the month of February with the 4 movies we'll be watching. It's about 10 minutes long. Nice little preview. Kind of, we talk about why we picked them, what ties them together, and what we're most excited to watch. So go check that out. And with that said, the next movie that we'll be watching and talking about next week will be True Romance from 1993. Hard left turn here from In the Mood for Love. Dylan has seen True Romance. I have not, and I don't think Adam has either.
I have not.
So I'm really excited to see that one. I think, Adam, you listed this as your most anticipated of the month of February. Is that right?
I did, yeah. Yeah, I'm expecting this to be a pretty fun ride. So
yeah, this would be a fun one to watch together if we can make it happen. Next week.
I'm open.
All right.
So on to opening statements. I had seen this before, so I guess I'll go first here. This was a second viewing, and nothing changed for how I feel about this movie. Okay. And my opening statement is that the score, cinematography, and costumes are all amongst the best I've ever seen in any movie.
Yeah, that's a great opening statement. It really makes it, particularly the costumes. It's been a while since I've seen a movie and I've noticed the costumes so much as I notice her dresses throughout the film.
God.
Yeah, it's truly incredible, and he always finds a way to show them in the best lighting possible.
Yep.
You know, it's like it'll be a dingy, dark alley, but there's like one ray of light, and she'll be standing in that, and she's got like a crazy emerald red blue dress, and it's just like bam, like yeah, really, truly a feast for the eyes.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to get to too before we go any further is that this is a Chinese movie set in Hong Kong, but it's got two very recognizable leads from like a Western perspective, two actors who have come over and made English movies and have been in a lot of things that we might recognize. So Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. But they're both faces that you would absolutely recognize. So I think that kind of adds to the, I don't want to say the appeal necessarily, but I think it makes it a little more accessible if you haven't seen this and you tend to not watch many foreign movies and it just kind of sounds like something that might not be up your alley. There are going to be faces here that you recognize and really, really good actors too. So I think that should just help to draw you in if Everywhere listing it as one of the 10 best movies ever made hasn't done that for you already.
Yeah. I can go next. Mine is just that In the Mood for Love is a beautiful portrait of lost love, and it's a spiritual kind of father to, I feel like, Past Lives, which is one of my favorite from this year. And I feel like, you know, when I saw Past Lives, I was like, oh, I haven't seen a movie that, you know, so wonderfully portrays almost affectionately like the idea of like lost love and like longing and kind of regret at missed opportunities. Those are all generally bad emotions, but both these movies treat those emotions with so much like endearment, like they're important and they're human, like we all experience them. So it's just like, and it's okay. And it's like, no, I wouldn't necessarily call these movies entertaining, but they're just so fantastically made and put together. And yeah, I just think it was a beautiful film.
Yeah, Adam? You definitely can't look away from either of these films, Past Lives or this. They just wrap you up and take you away. My opening statement is that this is visually sharp and achingly sincere, a punch in the gut and the embodiment of everything left unsaid.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One thing you mentioned to me too, Adam, when we were watching this was that you felt like you could reach out and touch the movie.
Yeah, the visuals on this, like I said, visually sharp. It feels like still life, like photography or still life, like paintings, but just like part of one of the actors will move like kind of slow motion. And it felt like you were standing in the alley that he was in. You could smell the rain and like you could smell what the city was like. You were physically there. It's just somehow it had that quality to it that just transported you, I think, more so than other movies. Like we talked about Barry Lyndon being gorgeous and being like painting, like very, very picturesque, very much like an old painting. And this is that in a different way, while still being like the highest form of visual art I think I've seen. And from a movie from 2000 where this isn't like CGI and stuff. This is just crystal clear.
It's all about like the textures and like everything is so like tactile. And then even then that especially when they're touching each other, when they hold hands briefly or they just barely touch, it's like everything, like you said, like the fabric that she's wearing and the alley, the dingy, it's just like you can feel it. You can feel kind of the grit. I like that.
Yeah, Nate, what's the Owen Wilson movie where he meets all the old like painters and stuff? Like he goes back in time.
Midnight in Paris.
That reminds me of this. Like that, it's because it has some of that same aesthetic, because it does transport you physically in that movie to another time. That's kind of how it felt, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a movie, and I have a couple listed later for observations and musings that I think you can just see the influence that this movie has had on many movies. And you've already mentioned Midnight in Paris. Dylan, you mentioned Past Lives. I got a couple other later that I wanted to bring up. But I think we can dive into defining moments. And it's going to be interesting for this movie because I basically, in the scenes that I've listed out, they're basically just locations.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of, it's an interesting movie in that they're kind of just doing the same thing for a lot of it. And that doesn't sound like it would necessarily be that captivating. But the way that it's shot and kind of the way that they play with the situation that they're in, which is something you don't really expect. Even once it starts happening, it takes you a little while to realize what they're doing.
Yeah.
that's part of what makes every scene so interesting, because there are kind of like 2 layers to everything that they say to each other. And so for me, the defining moments, the first one, and the moment when I knew this was going to be incredible, was when they pass each other on the stairs.
The first time?
When she's gone to get noodles, like down at that
Oh,
little
yeah.
market, and he's coming up, or she's coming up and he's going down. And there's just kind of a little glance, and the incredible main score for this movie is playing when it like, my God.
Yeah.
That moment I thought was fantastic. And then I had when they go out to dinner at the restaurant, the first time you see them kind of role playing for each other's spouses, how like when they're trying to kind of figure out how it might have started. And they don't, I really like how the movie doesn't announce that, how you just kind of happen upon them doing it. And the movie does that like many different times. And almost every single time you're just like, oop, they're getting closer to each other now. And then you realize that they're still kind of play acting a little bit, but at the same time, you know that they're getting closer to each other. And this is sort of their way to kind of sort of underhandedly bridge that gap in a way, which is really fascinating. And then the scene in the alley, or not in the alley really, but
which one?
Like, against the side of the wall, like kind of the last one.
Yeah.
When it's raining really hard.
Well, there's that one. And then the one that I'm thinking of is when they pretty much say, I think it's like the last time they actually see each other, like in present tense. It's towards the end of the movie. But that's kind of what I'm getting at with it. This movie kind of seems like just the same scene a lot. And it's incredible to me that it works as well as it does, because this is one of those movies that it's hard to kind of describe how good it is.
Yeah.
Because the execution is all just so top notch that it's hard to talk about this movie in a way that like appropriately conveys just how incredible it really is.
Well, and it's so different than I feel like most other romance movies, in the way that this doesn't have people like declaring their love. It doesn't have people doing like long monologues about like how much they care about the other person or why they're in this position, or just explaining anything. The most we get is the conversations between like the landlord people and our 2 main characters, kind of off and on. That's really the bulk of the dialogue here. A lot of it is just like knowing looks or aching, those types of things, over your shoulder, just like catching somebody's eye and then looking away. It's all of that kind of awkward relationship, early stuff or ending stuff, as if things were going poorly, all that stuff still kind of happens. And I think that's, you have to see it. You have to feel it in order to know what you're talking about. You know what I mean?
I feel like they do kind of do the same thing over and over, but it's the context around what they're doing slowly changes throughout the whole movie.
I just mean in an exercise like this, when you say defining moments, it's hard because they're like, you already said which one when they're standing against a wall.
Yeah.
And I had one more before kicking it to you guys. When he whispers into the little hole in the ruins.
For sure.
That was just fantastic. So
that was brilliant.
Yeah. A lot of great moments in this movie, but they're hard to describe like exactly why they're so great if you haven't seen it.
For me, particularly, I just put their reenactment scenes, because I felt like every time that it pops up, it's really well done. And to your point, every time you think, oh, they're talking about themselves, and like, oh, they're really getting to the point. It's like, oh no, they're just acting still. And that's definitely, all those were really good. I also had the ending. And then as far as the scenes together, I liked when they were stuck in his room together.
That one I thought about bringing up too, but I figured one of you would.
Yeah, you get like the food thing, you get them both kind of lying to cover it up, and then you get kind of just the tension. She's just like laying on the bed and he's just like on the chair, and it's just like, well, I guess we're just here for like hours and hours and hours now. And again, they don't cross any lines. Like
that. Yeah, that was really interesting too. Like they're kind of acting like they are, and watching that scene for the second time, there's a lot going on, kind of like they've moved things around in the room, or there's like food on a chair or like a water bottle over here or whatever. And I was thinking like this entire room could pretty much convey what's happening here without them in it. Like the setting is so good, and the way that it's shot. Like if you just plucked them both out of there and we just kind of stared at that room for like 20 seconds or like 5 minutes, if it's a Bellatar movie.
Yeah, let's not get started on that.
You could just kind of look around and kind of tell what's going on between them.
Well, I love in that scene that, you know, they're stuck in that room. They don't like end up like having sex or like really touching at all. But then when they're in that room because they're acting like people are going to think that they did anyway. You know what I mean? So like that, the whole playing on that is it's so funny. It's so
they still have to be deceitful, even though they're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah, even though there's nothing
kind of
going
plays
on.
into that like gossipy, like in an American movie, it would be like sort of the suburban thing that like Todd
you
Haynes
can't
is
park
into
at my
a lot,
house.
or like old Douglas Sirk movies. Like it would just be that like painful, gossipy kind of like wives club 50s sort of setting. But in this movie, it's kind of this little community that they've built for themselves in this sort of like boarding home.
Yeah,
I think you'd kind of call it. So yeah, it's kind of like almost out of their hands the way that it's going to be perceived.
Last one I was going to save this for observation and musings, but I'm just going to say it now because I think these are the defining moments for me, is those little poems in between, or I mean, they're not even poems, just narration, like when it's just the words pop up on the screen and then we just read them. Are those poems, or do you know from the tidbits like what those are? Are they like old proverbs or something? Or
so when I was reading like the quotes, like a couple of those were in the quote section. So I think there's just captions. I don't think there's anything like special behind them.
Okay,
so what anything in the tidbits. So
what I was gonna say is I've seen a lot of movies with stuff like that. It kind of reminded me of Ghost Dog. He's got all these like haikus that show up in the meaning in the middle of things, and like other movies will show written things on the screen, but often like those things feel like cutesy little additions to the movie and maybe not as important. Like I think the Wes Anderson movie had some sort of thing where we would like read, but it's just like those feel like cute kind of things, title cards. Like, okay, in this one they felt like so vitally important. They felt like they were like the words of like fate. Like they felt like it was like we're witnessing these two people. Are they, aren't they? Are they, aren't they? And then the words come and they're just like, he will regret it the rest of his life. It's just like,
yeah. It tells you what really happened because you're watching it and you still have no idea. And it kind of gives you a little bit of closure, which I think is why they work so well.
But that was just so effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Adam, did you have any that we haven't listed already?
I wrote down the whole thing. Whole thing.
Nice.
Right there.
Nice.
But yeah, them stuck in the room during mahjong. The end, like you mentioned, the temple bit. I think that was probably my favorite part. Yeah, the whole thing.
All right.
On to questions, and I wanted to ask you guys, why do you think they resist getting together when their spouses have already crossed that line, and they're kind of, in some ways, at least within the boundaries of like the four of them, kind of free to do so? But what do you think? What do you think holds them back?
I feel like part of it is like their nature. They're not the type to they seem like loyal partners to me, so they resist it for that reason. I also think that even when they do like each other, I feel like almost it's like a sense of, it's like we don't see too many scenes where they are yelling. We don't see any scenes where they're like yelling or confronting their partners. We don't see any scenes where they're having a meltdown and they're having like he's telling his family she's cheating on me and right. We don't get any of that. It's so reserved as far as like the expression of like anger and anguish, right? We see them cry a couple times. So I feel like it's almost like, even though they could, it's like the one thing that they have still over their partners is that they're not cheaters, and that like morally they didn't do that. And they say that a couple times in the dialogue. It's like, well, we're not them, or like, I didn't think we were going to be them, but I'm in love with, but like, still, I felt like if they were to act on it, then it's like truly they are no better than them. And then like all those emotions, like, where does that go now that I just did the same thing? So that maybe that was part of it. Another part of it might just be fate. If she had showed up at his place before he left the country, maybe they would have worked out. I like how the movie introduces a little bit of that too. Like just kind of like missed opportunities, ships in the night kind of thing. What do you think, Adam?
I think that was perfect, Dylan. I think like that was. I really enjoyed that. That's what I'd say.
Well, thank you. My question is kind of playing off that, but for you guys, did he do the right thing?
I guess. I mean, you mean like with where he ends up in the end, like all of his decisions, because he leaves the country at one point, which for him definitely seems to be. He feels to me like the one who was closer to making a move than she was.
Mm-hmm.
And he sensed that maybe she wasn't there, and it was easier for him to just leave. I mean, he kind of almost explicitly says that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he did the right thing for himself. I don't think there was necessarily like a completely right or a completely wrong answer given the situation that they found themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a little bit of a bummer that it kind of feels like I feel like they both would have gotten to the same place eventually, because we see them later and they're both kind of on their own.
Yeah, and they both bring up the other one. Like,
yeah, but it's just sort of like it's been a few years now, and that's just kind of gone.
It's just in the past,
and probably something they'll both think about forever. But you know, if he hadn't done it that way, we wouldn't have gotten that amazing ending.
Yeah, seriously, that's just a fantastic ending, and that ending makes. I mean, I feel like that's kind of very resolutely like, you know, they did not end up together. He hasn't seen her in years, and that's kind of his last thing, you know, to do.
There is a sequel with his character in it.
That's what I have heard. But the ending is so perfect. I don't know if I want to watch that right away.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my only. And what do you think, Adam? I mean, it's hard to say. Wrong or right is hard to apply to stuff when it comes to love, because human emotions don't listen to that. But the element of the cheating and them resisting the cheating is like the one, you know, like they did do that at the expense of maybe what could have been.
Their own happiness to a certain point. I think the way things shake out, or at least like what we're shown at the end, that's the right move. Because not only is he like okay and fine, I mean, obviously not with anybody, but doing his own thing. She's kind of the same way. She's fine doing her own thing. I will say though, when Nate and I got done with it, I kind of interpreted the ending a little bit differently, because I was hopeful. I was the wish being the father of the thought. I was hopeful that the child was his. And I think there's a way you can see that.
I think it still could be, you know, maybe
I don't think it is.
Even if it was, I feel like they're clearly not together, and he.
It doesn't matter if it is or not.
You know, in the like, it's still a long lost love that he never saw again. Maybe he knows he's a kid, maybe he doesn't. But
yeah, the point of that inclusion is that she has a kid. It doesn't matter whose it is. If it was her husband's or if it was his, it doesn't matter. I mean, it changes a little bit of like what the end kind of signifies. Like something happened and then they really decided maybe not. But I think the inclusion of a child is an interesting thing to have, because it does.
Yeah, I think it sort of juxtaposes in an interesting way with like the plant growing out of that hole in the ruins. Adam and I talked about this at the end too, and I can't help but wonder if there's there's got to be some type of like social subtext that we're not really aware of, not being from there. But I do know, I mean, I've seen a lot of Japanese movies from like the 40s and 50s, and there's a lot of kind of post-war Western culture encroaching onto Japanese culture kind of thing. I felt like that was why that their spouses were going to Japan. To me, that's kind of what that was signifying, and maybe like a lack of caring about sort of traditional values that they feel like their countries are losing. And you even see how that floor that they live on, they're very neighborly. They're almost like a family. And then when he goes back to visit like 4 years later, the landlady talks about how like they don't know their neighbors anymore.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if kind of that bit at the end with like the plant coming out of the ruins is meant to be like he kept his soul, and so did she. Like they didn't kind of cave into like completely embracing full on Western culture. I could be very wrong about this. That was how I interpreted the ending with
I like
very
that.
minimal knowledge of that point in history, but with just like a little bit.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I do think it makes a difference if that kid is his or not, but
well, also the with the Western culture thing, the gifts that their spouses bought for each other and that whole conversation that totally feeds into that too.
And
like,
every time you see his wife like talking on the phone, like she's going to be late, like early in the movie, it's shot and there's like a Siemens clock. It's like a Western company clock right in front of the, which has to be on purpose.
Yeah.
Nothing about this movie feels like it was on accident.
Accidental.
I mean, Adam, I don't know if you have how long it took to shoot this movie in your tidbits or not.
I do.
We can talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Any more questions or move on to observations and musings?
Let's move on.
So observations and musings, Dylan, you already brought this up. The first one I have was that just I love her dresses. They're incredible.
Yeah, that was my main one too.
And then the one that I wanted to mention, the other one I wanted to mention was the influence that I've seen this movie have. I wrote a little short review on Letterboxd for this, and if I can find it, I have it listed here. The two movies that I thought of right away after I watched this for the first time were Portrait of a Lady on Fire and Phoenix.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I can understand that.
The close quarters longing of Portrait of a Lady on Fire, just lots of looks, and then the telling rehearsals of Phoenix, which Adam, I don't think you've seen Phoenix, but like Dylan, I think you'll understand what I mean with the rehearsal aspect, just kind of having these, like adding these layers to the dialogue and to what the characters are saying and doing right in front of each other. And you guys already mentioned two other movies that you thought you could see this in. So I mean, this just feels like an insanely influential movie. And just another reason I'm really glad I saw it, because then I can kind of pick this stuff up in other movies that came out after it that I've seen.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, obviously this is influential. We saw if you saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, there's a couple scenes in the middle of that movie where they're kind of flashing through a bunch of different universes, and there's a universe where the main character is in a big or not big, ornate Chinese dress, and the male character is down there in an all black suit with a white undershirt, like smoking, leaning against an alleyway. And it's like that's straight out of this movie. And this is a tidbit I had learned, I think, Nate, when we looked it up before we watched it, that the main character in Everything Everywhere All at Once was the studio assistant to the director for this movie.
Well, yeah, her husband, not Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
But
Sorry, thank you.
Kar-wai Kwan was like Wong Kar-wai's assistant in like the 90s and through this movie. So more ties to it, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
The only the major observation or musing that I had is that color is so important in this movie, and it's so immaculate. The contrasts are so well done. Even like you were saying, Dylan, the light that she's standing under is just so perfectly outlined and contrasted against the darkness of the where they live. I thought that was a very, very important part of this movie. And I obviously don't understand the significance of red in Chinese culture, or that signifies passion, of course. But like I read that like yellow is more supposed to symbolize like coitus or sex, and then like pink can be something else. And like I don't understand all that subtext. Because obviously we're not Chinese, but I think the different dresses that she wears, I'm sure, inform more of the scene than we're aware of, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, no, I think the use of lighting and the color red, particularly, the best I've seen since Dario Argento's Suspiria, which we watched recently.
We did.
I mean, I thought that was like the best use of the color red in any movie, and this is pretty much right up there. I mean, all the colors are just popping. Everything looks terrific all the time, in like a very realistic way. I was also saying my observation of musing is he makes smoking look so cool. This is definitely a cool guy smoking movie.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many shots of just like the smoke in slow motion.
Oh my god, like against the light.
Well.
Yeah, really, really cool. And then also kind of a cool like a film effect that he had where it almost kind of it got kind of like choppy a little bit. And it was like almost a little slow motion.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that was interesting the times that he used that. like as if the movie wasn't already visually appealing enough. Every once in a while, he threw in like this
Like
cool
we need
effect
just a little bit more.
Yeah. So I really like that as well.
On to tidbits.
Let's do it.
Tidbits.
All right, Adam, what do you got?
So Maggie Cheung wears a different dress in each scene. There were 46 dresses in total, and though not all of them made it to the final cut, but 46 different dresses is bananas to me.
She dresses up like that just to get noodles.
Just to get noodles. So sad. So lonely.
Just gotta do what you gotta do. Maggie Cheung's hair and makeup took 5 hours each day to apply, which, I mean,
that's like the same as the people who played orcs.
Seriously.
Filming for this movie took 15 months. So Nate, you alluded to that. It took 15 months. A lot of people had to put other projects on hold because this took so long. It took over a year.
What?
Yeah, I think that was a bigger deal for Maggie Cheung because she was a bigger star than Tony Leung was. So I think he was a little more just like, yeah, whatever. It's taken a while. And she had to, I think, pass up on some stuff, or this kind of messed up some things she had going.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It just took so long because he's a perfectionist director, or
they had to reshoot a lot of this movie too.
Yeah, improvisational and perfectionist. They also kind of shot it differently, where there was a bunch of dialogue and it was a little bit more like dialogue heavy, of that back and forth. And then throughout filming, they just decided they didn't want to go with that kind of tone and just changed it.
So they basically like reshot the whole movie.
Yeah,
that'll do it.
Yeah.
Where to go? The film was ranked in number 2 in BBC's top 100 greatest films of the 21st century, which I believe, Nate, you mentioned. It's the highest ranking non-English film in that list. The original idea for this movie and inspiration stemmed from a Japanese short story concerning two characters who walk by each other on a stairwell but never say anything to each other. In that story,
shot, right? Where it comes from.
In that story, the characters end up committing suicide.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, this is a happy ending than this.
But that's a different. I mean, they do a very different take on that in this one, which I really like. And then this was just something that I read to Nate earlier. Dylan, I'm not gonna read this whole thing because it's super long. It's a quote, but Wong Kar-wai states that he was influenced by Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo while making this film, and compares Tony Leung's character to James Stewart's.
Is that maybe why you get so much like red and green again? Because those are the two main colors of Vertigo.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, he was. I'll paraphrase what he says. Is he's interested that the audience thinks of these people as the good people because they're not the ones cheating, while they're actively going out and being, not mischievous, but they're just hiding things when they have nothing to hide. He's like, I think that's attributed to the fact that Tony Leung's character, like his face, he's just so like adorable and so like earnest. And looking for love that you just believe it right away. So he's like, I like to play with that, and I think there's a similar dark undertone from James Stewart's character to Tony Leung's character. So those are the tidbits.
Nice. All right. It is now time for the moment we've all been waiting for. Adam,
Papa. Look at that.
It is time to present the McCabe Coat of Excellence to someone involved with the movie who has exhibited excellence. We don't have to give out a coat if we don't want to, but we can each give one out. And is this going to be? Are we all going to be the same here? I kind of feel like we are, but
I mean, I think so. It's just it's the closest we can get to giving it to just everyone. Everyone involved. Yeah, Wong Kar-wai. Yeah, just
or whoever the costume person was.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got to give it to Wong Kar-wai. Just the whole vision here. Everything is at like an A+ level, and that doesn't happen without the director.
Yeah, the use of anytime that theme song is playing, and the camera is slowly moving through the room as we watch them do anything, it's just incredible.
Well, and I loved. I made mention of this to Nate while we were watching it. I love the inclusion of like Spanish romance music.
Oh yeah, that was a nice touch too. Yeah,
such a nice touch. It's like
perhaps. That was really well done.
Yeah. Yeah, Wong Kar-wai. I think
Wong Kar-wai. There you go. 3 coats or 1 coat.
3 for 3 for Wong Kar-wai. Closing statements. For me, I do agree that this is one of the best movies ever made, and this is a good place for me to share that it is personally for me number 36 on my list, right between The Spirit of the Beehive and The Big Lebowski.
Nice.
That's a funny pairing right there. In the Mood for Love and The Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
No, I'll echo that sentiment. This is a gorgeous movie,
Mhm.
in and out, through and through. All aspects of this were done immaculately, and it deserves all the praise it gets. 5 stars, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just said it's a definitive movie on longing and regret. And you'd think that would make it very depressing, but I wasn't depressed. I was just
it's kind of life affirming in a weird way.
Yeah, it really is. I just think it's incredibly put together, and if I would totally rewatch it. When I rewatch it, it can definitely make my top 100. That's incredible. I've thought about it a lot since I watched it. So, yeah,
awesome.
big fan.
Great start to the month of February. Hopefully, True Romance will kick us into gear.
Maybe not a Valentine's Day movie pick if you're out there listening and you and your sweetness like to watch movies. It's a great movie, not necessarily a great date movie. I don't think.
True Romance, you mean, or In the Mood for Love?
In the Mood for Love.
Okay, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Like, don't ruin True Romance for me like
no,
that.
No. Yeah, In the Mood for Love is.
I was like, I thought it was supposed to be fun, Dylan.
Yeah.
No, True Romance is fun. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Looking forward to that one too. We'll be back with that next week. And I believe it is my turn to put a wrap on the show.
Go for it.
Take it away.
I was only curious to know how it started. Feelings can creep up just like that.